Welcome back. We have Dave Moyer, curator of estuarine biology for the Calvert Marine Museum. Dave, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Key. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I currently serve as curator for the estuarine biology department at the Calvert Marine Museum. And that basically is a blanket department that covers all of the living collections at the museum. So when you go to the Calvert Marine Museum, we have three primary displays. One is estuarine biology, one is paleontology, and the other is maritime history. And the museum, the mission of the museum is to tie together the three stories of those departments to tell the whole story of the Chesapeake Bay. So I serve the role of making sure that the livestock are managed properly and that the exhibits look really nice and clean and fresh, and that they are representative of the different habitat types that you might find out in the Chesapeake Bay. We have about 15 aquariums in our primary exhibit, which is called River to Bay Reflections and Connections. And we have the Secret of the Mermaid's Purse exhibit, which focuses on skates and rays of the mid-Atlantic. And we have river otters and animals in our touch tanks in the discovery room, reptiles, amphibians. Probably about the only thing that we don't do at the museum are birds. But we do have birds that commonly appear out in our marsh exhibit along the marsh walk, which you can see as you tour around.
Sounds like a fun job.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And spending all this time around Southern Maryland, Chesapeake Bay, can you tell us a bit about the ecosystems?
Sure. Well, of course, my job is to make sure that we have a vibrant collection, a living collection. But the real purpose of my job is to make sure that the animals are actors on stages that tell the story of the Chesapeake Bay from the standpoint of the living species today and the current status of the various habitats around the bay. In the River to Bay exhibit, we focus on three primary habitat types. One is the deep open water, which basically explores where large ocean vessels are coming and going through the bay. And the Sheltering Shallows exhibit focuses on the places where people frequently encounter the bay's brackish systems. Brackish water systems are where you have fresh water and salt water mixing at different salinities. And the primary habitats there are submerged aquatic vegetation, oyster reefs, and salt marshes. And those three habitats are really fundamental in explaining the story of the bay, because so much has changed since man has really started to take residence around the bay with respect to those habitat types and the availability of that habitat to the native species, that it's becoming a real problem for fisheries management and for coastal land management to work with the bay to help it restore itself, which ultimately is what people are trying to do today with like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the Chesapeake Bay what do you call it? I can't remember.
Chesapeake
Sorry about
Bay
that.
Foundation?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, it's not important.
Very sorry.
So the Sheltering Shallows exhibits, and then we also have a focus on the tidal freshwaters of the Chesapeake Bay. A lot of people are familiar with tides. As the moon circles around the earth, the ebb and flow of the tides comes and goes. But the thing is that tides don't stop where the saltwater interfaces with the Chesapeake Bay. The tides go all the way up to our major inland cities like Richmond and Baltimore and DC. All these places were actually built when settlers came here because that's as far as they could go into the bay systems with their large ocean-going vessels. So if you follow a line across the map, it's called the fall line. It's basically where you transition from the Piedmont into the coastal plains of the Chesapeake Bay states. And it's where you have a rapid decrease in elevation, followed by a long tapering flowing river that goes all the way out to the ocean. So the freshwaters are very important ecosystems in the bay, and as such, we definitely want to highlight them in our exhibitry.
Thank you. That was
Sure.
a lot more than most biology classes will teach around here. But so you mentioned multiple states. Some people just think it's the DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia, but there should be other states, right?
Yes, absolutely. The Chesapeake Bay is a 64,000 square mile watershed. It includes, of course, Maryland, Virginia, and the DC area, but it also is connected to the the eastern Pennsylvania region, primarily the Susquehanna River. And in the formation of the Chesapeake Bay, the main channel in the center of the Chesapeake Bay was actually where the Susquehanna used to stream across the states before sea level rise basically flooded that basin and created today's modern bay. And this is in the past 12 to 15,000 years or so. So if you were here 15,000 years ago as a Native American, you wouldn't be experiencing the Chesapeake Bay. You would be experiencing the Susquehanna River, which is again tied to Pennsylvania. But New York, New Jersey, Delaware, these states all border and have impact on the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, so huge region,
Yes.
all using around this watershed.
Yes.
What are some of the effects of that?
So the projections are in about 15 years ago, by 15 years from now, by 2030, there's going to be about 20 million people that live in this 64,000 square mile watershed. And this is up from back when John Smith came here in 1607, when there were Native American populations numbering in the tens of thousands that were taking advantage of the bay. So in 400 years, we have gone from tens of thousands of people to 20 million. And the impacts are really, really harsh for the ecosystem, especially when you take into consideration all of the modern things that we have come to love in our lifestyles. All the different chemicals that help us out in our day-to-day lives, whether it's some industrial cleaners to take care of your bathroom needs or the type of laundry detergent that you use. These things are direct pollutants in the bay, and they're very problematic. And of course, feeding 20 million people, you have to grow a lot of crops. There's a lot of agricultural development around the bay, and with good crop programs, well, what we thought were good crop programs, pesticide applications and the use of fertilizers to get the most out of the land was the way to go. And we found that these pesticides and these fertilizers and all of these detergents and chemicals are just going right into the bay directly. And whether it's a point source pollution or a non-point source pollution, they have direct impacts on the ecosystems. For instance, the type of detergent you use. One of the primary ingredients of a lot of detergents used to be phosphorus, and phosphorus is a primary nutrient for algae. So when we're washing our clothes, we don't think about it. We just throw this stuff in because we want nice white whites and clean looking clothes, and they smell great. And this phosphorus is going out into the bay in the discharge from our washing machines, and it's creating giant algae blooms. And algae blooms may not seem like they're a big deal until you start to look at the ecosystem as a whole. And what scientists found out was that the algae was getting so thick that it was blocking out the sun from the natural SAV, or the submerged aquatic vegetation. That submerged aquatic vegetation, like I was saying before, is a primary habitat for juvenile things that we are really interested in when it comes to the bay. So when you go to your favorite restaurant and you order striped bass, or you're ordering blue crabs or oysters, those things depend on high quality habitats like submerged aquatic vegetation beds to start off their juvenile lives. And without that habitat, you don't end up with the result of having a nice big fillet of fish at your dinner table because they never had a chance to get big. So the refuge that is the submerged aquatic vegetation became depleted because of these giant algae blooms up in the water column. And that's just one example. There's a myriad of problems, of course, with any type of discharge. You have direct sewage discharge, which is us doing our business and then flushing it out into the bay. That's nitrogen fueling these algae blooms. The extra biomass, or the bioload, causes oxygen depletion in certain parts of the bay, and you can have whole bottom sections of the bay just dying off from it going anaerobic because it gets hot in the summertime and all this extra biomass is there, and all the bacteria start doing their thing, acting on the biomass, and the bacteria then die off in large numbers, and as they die, and as they do their business, they consume all the oxygen, depleting it for the other things that are essential to the ecosystem as a whole. And of course, you have a whole problem with things like plastics and petroleum products, et cetera, et cetera.
Would you like to introduce the friend you have?
Sure, this is the horseshoe crab, and this is just a little fella from the bay, but a lot of people are very familiar with these. You were telling me earlier that you had found these, the old discarded casings from the animals or their exoskeletons on beaches before, which is a common find if you're a beachcomber. But the horseshoe crab is a very important species to the Chesapeake Bay. Now, you might not think of it as much to you and I because this doesn't look like something that would be very tasty. In reality, people around here don't eat these, but they are known to be eaten. There's a very tasty mussel that spins their telson around, this tail here. But horseshoe crabs were fundamental in the early settlement around the Chesapeake Bay. Before the advent of inorganic fertilizers, organic fertilizers were essential for crop production. And Native Americans taught the English, in particular, that if you had something like a horseshoe crab or a striped bass and you deposited it into a hole and then planted maize or corn on top of it, the corn would produce much more for you. So horseshoe crabs became known as a very important source of fertilizer. And there are these pictures from back in the 1800s and early 1900s where around the Delaware Bay and the Chesapeake Bay, horseshoe crabs were collected in the millions and just stockpiled up on the beaches. And you see people walking around and there's stacks of horseshoe crabs that are 15 feet high. And basically the horseshoe crabs were then milled into fertilizer that would then be turned into the soils of farmlands. This practice was good for agriculture purposes, but it was very, very bad for a lot of other things. For one, horseshoe crab eggs, they come from the spawning events that people were going out and finding these horseshoe crabs at. They would come in to shallow waters in the millions, literally, and be easily harvested. But what they're doing in there is reproducing. And the horseshoe crab's biology, its life cycle, they come up right into the shallows. The males grab onto the back of the females. She deposits some eggs in the sand right at the water's edge, and then she drags the male across for fertilizing. The thing is that many, many migratory birds in particular have gotten cued into the timing of the horseshoe crab's life cycle to the point that they would migrate thousands of miles and know as I pass by the Chesapeake Bay at the right time, there's going to be a wealth of horseshoe crab eggs for me to restock my fuel supplies before I head on the next 1,000 miles, so to speak. So humans came along. We took these animals out and harvested them for our own purposes, and it had a direct impact on a lot of highly migratory bird species. And migratory birds are definitely, they're having a lot of problems around the bay in most species. There's been a lot of declines since humans came along. But horseshoe crabs today actually have a lot of very interesting qualities for humans. One thing is that they're oftentimes harvested and used for bait in eel traps, and eels are directly consumed, but they're also great bait for things like striped bass. So it's bait for striped bass, and everybody loves to eat striped bass. They're delicious. But another thing is horseshoe crabs can be harvested for their blood. And if you take these animals and you expose the soft tissue right here, you can actually insert a needle into this animal's bloodstream and extract a portion of its blood without killing the animal. So taking the blood and then releasing the animal back into the wild to recover. Just like, you know, if we had blood taken from us or if we donated blood, we would recover from it. It's very similar to that. The reason it's done, though, is that the horseshoe crab's blood has a unique quality, and it's something that scientists have not been able to figure out how to replicate synthetically. So the only way to get this is to extract it directly from the horseshoe crabs. You can't just make it. The blood is interesting in that if it is put into medicines, and the sample of the medicine has some impurity in it, like a virus or a bacteria, it will coagulate, which is something that it happens on the inside of the horseshoe crab. When it gets a bacterial infection, this blood will coagulate around the infection. It's the property of the blood. The thing is, though, is that we can use that in pharmaceuticals to test purity of large samples of pharmaceutical products to make them safe for you and I. And it is true, I guarantee it, that you sitting here today, you are healthier because of horseshoe crabs. I guarantee it. And you probably didn't know that.
Not at all.
It's a fact. And the thing is that once again, this is something that we can't replicate yet. Maybe one day we will. But horseshoe crabs are harvested today primarily for their blood and use in testing pharmaceuticals, which is fantastic.
That is. I have never heard that before. You learn something new every day.
That's right. Now this one wouldn't be able to test too many drugs for you, but you know, he's just a little guy.
Yeah. But you were telling me earlier, so how did you come across this one?
This animal right here was brought into the museum by a guest that was out doing some beach combing. We get a lot of folks that find stuff out on the beach and they want to find out, hey, what is this? So that's the importance of facilities like the Calvert Marine Museum. They serve as educational resources. They serve as that kind of nexus or that hub where people can come and get their questions answered about their community. Well, somebody came in and they had a jar of horseshoe crabs. I think there were like 200 of them or so. And they just gave them to one of the aquarists or one of the biologists that works at the museum. That biologist turned around and raised these things up from eggs through a variety of stages. They start off very small. They look a little different from this. They don't have this long tail when they first hatch out, but they're very similar in how their life proceeds. They hang out on the bottom most of the time and they burrow in the sand. And she raised these things up from eggs to this size right here. And we're only down to a couple of them now. We've used some in our exhibits and we've shipped some out to other facilities that were interested in them. And we have also, by permission from DNR, released several of them as they've gotten large enough to release and help to repopulate the horseshoe crabs out in the bay. Literally, these animals probably would have all been gone, save one or two. Horseshoe crabs have millions of eggs and only a few survive to carry on the next generation. So by us taking in this group of, say, 200, most of them survived to this kind of size right here, which means that they had a nice head start in life. So we did our little part to help repopulate the bay's horseshoe crabs.
Glad to hear.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Well, thank you again for coming in, Dave. It's been great. If you're looking for Calvert Marine Museum, there's a website.
That's right. I definitely want to visit calvertmarinemuseum.com. Not only does it have everything about our myriad of programs and our concert events, it has a lot about all of the different exhibits at the museum. You can get a taste of the different collections remotely. And we just launched our River Otter live webcams in the past couple of months. So anybody can log on to the website and see our river otters, which are the most beloved animals in our collection, 24 hours a day. 7 days a week. So if you need your river otter fix, go to calvertmarinemuseum.com.
That's exciting.
Yes.
Well, thank you again. This has been CSM Today. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.